Hey friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and in today's video we are going to do lots of meal prep where I'm going to share some recipes for you, things like homemade muffins. We're going to do some breakfast sausage, meatballs, homemade mayonnaise, Jell-O, lots of things that I made in preparation for this week's meals. One of my favorite things to do in the autumn months on the weekend, while the men in the house are busy watching their football games and while the children are playing outside on nice days and the baby might be napping, is I take a couple hours to just do prep work to make making meals for my family throughout the week that much easier. Now, I know what you might be thinking. If everybody else is relaxing and doing these fun things like watching a football game and playing outside, why am I not putting my feet up and relaxing too? Well, I am a busy mother of 8. I homeschool. I have a lot of things going on. Sometimes self care doesn't look like putting your feet up and just watching a movie on the weekend. While that does happen sometimes in the evenings, sometimes a better form of self care for me is to take little opportunities to work ahead. Because if I invest that time in the weekend to do that, it makes my week that much less stressful and much more enjoyable. And that's a form of caring for myself. So if I do the prep work for easy breakfasts throughout the week, maybe in the mornings I don't have to rush around to make a hot meal. If the work is done, I can sit in the dark house before the children wake, in the quiet house, and just enjoy a cup of hot tea and pray and do things for myself in the morning instead of rushing around to get a meal on the table. Same in the evenings. It can get very hectic here while we're getting children ready to get to their afternoon activities, while also trying to get a home cooked meal from scratch on the table. If I do a lot of the prep work in over the weekend, then it makes my day less stressful and I can actually enjoy that time with my children instead of feeling frazzled. So while there are times in the weekend where I do relax and definitely get some rest in, one of my favorite things on these afternoons in the autumn is to hear, we live in a very small house, so we can hear what's going on. If I hear my men cheering for their football team in the other room, the baby might be napping, the windows are open. If it's a nice day outside, I can hear the children playing outside and giggling and laughing and just hearing all of these joyful noises from my family while I get to be in the kitchen working on nourishment for them for the week. It just really warms my mama heart and I love it. And so I'm going to share one of those days with you. We're going to make lots of wonderful meals like I mentioned, and let's go ahead and get started. If that's something that interests you, we're going to dive right into some weekly meal prep. The baby is down for her nap. Everybody else is kind of busy doing their little activities, watching what they want to watch, playing what they want to play, and I now have some uninterrupted time to get to work in the kitchen. I love working in the kitchen just at my own pace without feeling rushed. It's so fun. So this is my first task of the day. I would like to get some beef bones roasting in the oven to make broth for the week. These are still rather frozen, but that's no problem. We're still going to just put them in the pan and they will thaw as they roast. These are homegrown. This is from our homegrown beef. I just had 3 beef bones in this package, so this isn't going to be a huge batch of broth. We're going to use our small crock pot to eventually do this. And then to my broth, I just use whatever vegetables I have on hand. We had some onions and some garlic from this last year's crop. So I decided, since I was already roasting the bones, I would just add them to the roasting pan and let them also roast alongside with it. The garlic, there is no need for me to remove the peels really on either of these items. Since these are going to be going into broth, all of the solids will eventually be strained out. So I can just throw the garlic, peels and all, right onto the roasting pan. We could pop them out of the peels after they roast really easily, or we can just leave them all on there and it's not going to hurt anything in our broth. I preheated my oven to 350 degrees and we are just going to let these roast while we do some of our other work. Now, since I have extra space in the oven and it's already going to be hot, I figured I would grab 3 pounds of bacon here, and we're going to go ahead and cook this up. This is really thick bacon. Our friend raises pork for us, and it's very thick. So if I want to make this in the morning, it takes a really long time to cook. So I find that if I pre-cook it over the weekend, it'll make it that much easier for me in the morning to have bacon ready in time for breakfast. While the oven is busy doing its thing, I'm going to pour a pint of concentrated Concord grape juice. This is home canned juice. And I'm also going to strain out 1 quart of cranberry juice. I'm putting this in a pan, and we're going to get this warming up on the stove to make some Jell-O to have for snacks this week. So all we need to do is get this up on the stove, and while that is warming up, I can do another task. I had 1 pint of our squeezed lemon juice. We squeezed this last winter, and that lemon juice is in our freezer. And whenever I want to make lemonade, I just thaw out a pint of it, and I grab this half-gallon pitcher. I can pour that lemon juice in there, and we're going to have some homemade lemonade. Now, I don't really measure this out. I just have my sugar container up here, and I did about 3/4 of a cup added to that pint of lemon juice. This is one of our main sources of vitamin C. Whenever I feel like we haven't had enough citrus in a while, I'll just thaw out some of that, lemon juice, and I feel like it gives my kids a little vitamin C boost when they need it. So we filled it the rest of the way with water. We're going to stir that up and get that in the fridge. And then this week we'll have some fresh, not fresh, but frozen made lemonade, homemade, ready to go whenever we would like it with a meal. It's one of those tasks that I have a hard time remembering to do throughout the week, remembering to thaw out the lemon juice in time when we want lemonade. So now it's all done and it's ready to go. We're just going to stir the rest of that juice over there that's on the stove, and it's not quite hot enough to add our gelatin, so let's go ahead and move on to another task. I'm adding 1 cup of regular olive oil to that lemon juice jar that I was using. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of lemon juice back to it. I'm adding also approximately 2 tablespoons of mustard to the jar. We're going to add a little bit of salt. You could also spice this up. I sometimes will add a little cayenne powder, any kind of, seasonings you want in your mayonnaise. And then we are going to add 1 egg. And because my jar was cold from that partially frozen lemon juice, this didn't emulsify as it usually does. But when you get a runny mayonnaise, it's not that big of a deal. You can use it for salad dressing, but it is really important if you use a room temperature egg and not a cold egg, and make sure your jar is not cold, it will emulsify a lot thicker. And when you do put it in the fridge, this will thicken up as those oils cool down a little bit. So once you start making homemade mayonnaise, it is so easy. You won't go back to store-bought. I always on the weekend like to make a little pint of this mayonnaise and have it in the fridge to use for salad dressings or any other thing that we would use mayonnaise in for the week. By this point, the juice was warm enough to add our gelatin to. I use pastured beef gelatin. I buy it in bulk from Azure Standard. It is important that you thoroughly stir it while you're adding the gelatin or else it will clump up. And I know that some people will add the gelatin to the cold juice and then just add a little hot juice to it. I've done it that way before too, but I find that that leaves a thick, solid film at the bottom of my Jell-O. I much prefer the texture of the Jell-O if I stir it into the hot liquid. And so if I do get any clumps, I just run it through a strainer before I put it into my pan here. It'll catch all of the clumps and then I'll have a perfect Jell-O texture. So this is how easy it is to make homemade Jell-O without any, high fructose corn syrup, sugars, food dyes, any of that stuff. The hardest part about making Jell-O is transferring it here from your pan to the fridge. We're going to put it in the fridge. It only takes a couple hours to set. And we ended up a couple days later, we always have a snack right before we start our homeschool day. And I decided to slice this up for the children. It works out perfectly. I have 8 children And this slices up into 8 slices, and everybody can have a little piece before we start our school day. Gelatin is really high in protein, and then of course we have all of the vitamins and minerals and other items that might be in the juice. And so I think this is just a really healthy treat for the children. They're getting a little protein boost from that gelatin, but they love it because it's just novel. It's fun, that it's jiggly, it's tasty. Everybody loves it, the little ones and the older ones, and it's just so easy to make. And sometimes if I'm feeling up to it, I'll turn the Jell-O into something like gummies, or sometimes we'll just do it this easy way and cut it into shapes like this. So if you're still buying the little boxes of Jell-O brand Jell-O, get rid of it, buy some gelatin in bulk, and start making your own flavors. You can use any kind of juice. We use orange juice, pineapple juice, all of our home canned juices and things. It all turns out delicious. Now it's time to get some eggs cleaned up. It was rainy in the days leading up to this particular day, and so some of the eggs came in a little dirty from the chicken and duck runs, and so I'm just getting them scrubbed up. I like to use our homegrown loofah. It's perfect for scrubbing our eggs. And then I always like to start the week by having at least a dozen hard-boiled eggs in the fridge. They make a quick snack. I can always, if I have them available, chop them up and put them in chicken salad or tuna salad, or even just make an egg salad like we're going to make here on this day. To hard boil my eggs, I like to use this Dash egg cooker. It's my favorite. It steams them, and I find that it makes my farm fresh eggs really easy to peel, and I'll show you that here shortly. But we just get this set up. It takes about 10 minutes for it to steam up. There's a little song that it'll play when it's all done. But in the meantime, while it's still cooking, I'm going to hand off the baby monitor to the men here, and they can kind of keep an eye on the baby while I head out to the garden. Just going to check and see what is available out here. We have some small little green onions that I could harvest. We have some French breakfast radishes, a couple peppers here. We have lots of celery. I just harvested a little bit of it. And then we needed some herbs, so I grabbed a little bit of rosemary, and we are going to head back into the house and put all of these goodies to use. This day actually was the last day before we had our first real frost. So the garden is just about done for the season. We still have a couple things that survived the frost. Like the rest of the celery was okay. We still have some root veggies and things that will grow just fine out there. But for the most part, we are done with the garden for this season, and I have mixed feelings about that. Part of me is just so ready to be done. The other part of me will definitely miss days like this where I can get a bowl of, fresh radishes washed up for the family to snack on and have all of these beautiful fresh vegetables available. But we have preserved enough that we will get through the winter just fine. Now, I have preserved so many batches of celery greens. I freeze dried, I think, 3 batches to use for broth making throughout the rest of the year. So the majority of those greens are going to go to the birds or into the compost pile. I washed up all of the stalks, and I'm going to go ahead and just freeze dry the stalks for this batch. Freeze drying celery stalks is my preferred method. I preserved celery in many different ways. I did pickle some this year, and I have yet to try it. People have said that is very good in things like chicken salad and other items like that. So I'm excited to try that, but I do like to use this freeze-dried celery in those ways. So I will rehydrate it, use it in egg salad and chicken salad. I'll just toss a couple handfuls of this celery into any soup that we're making, or if I'm making a batch of broth. It's just a really easy way to preserve it. I will also powder the freeze-dried celery down I can make celery salt or celery powder. I love using the freeze dryer for this specific purpose. And now I only am going to have 2 trays worth of celery because I didn't harvest the rest of it. So I need to fill the other 2 trays that fit in one batch. And we have lots of bushels of apples sitting in the kitchen. So I decided to go ahead and chop some up into slices to fill the rest of the trays. Just because the food preservation season in the garden is done doesn't mean that I will stop preserving food. We have items like the apples that we have in storage that still need to be used up before they go soft. So if they start showing any signs of softening or wrinkling, this is my favorite way to preserve apples. I'll just fill up trays of the freeze dryer with them, and you don't even notice that they were softening when they're that freeze dried texture. Adam was taking a break to kind of come in and talk to me, and he spied the bowl there of radishes, and I told him he was allowed to have some, and we were just sitting here talking about the difference in flavor between a spring radish and these fall radishes. We find the spring ones to be have much more potency to them. It's just amazing how little differences in the weather can really change the flavor profile of different vegetables. So I love having those radishes to snack on. It's one of my family's favorites. So now we're just going to go ahead and load the freeze dryer up. What I love about freeze drying in the fall and winter months is that batches take much less time. When my kitchen is hot, it makes the freeze dryer run longer. But when the kitchen is cool, and my kitchen stays very cool, about 60 degrees through the winter, it takes no time at all to run a batch. And so this batch of celery and apples only took 17 hours. And I've calculated before that it actually takes about $3 in electricity cost to run the freeze dryer for a full 24-hour cycle. So, this batch, because it only took 17 hours, was much more like $2. And so if you think about, it's just celery from the garden and some apples that were going to go soft, that's not a bad cost to get this food put up to enjoy later on in the year. Now, if I were to let the children snack on these, they would eat all of these trays right now. But as I mentioned, we have way too many bushels of fresh apples that need to be eaten before I'm going to let them dig into these slices. So we're going to get these put away in a jar, and these will be stored away for when we run out of fresh apples, probably in March. And because they are frozen and not cooked or anything nutritionally, it's just like them eating a fresh apple. Now the celery, we're also going to go ahead and put in a jar. I have done multiple batches of celery throughout the year and put them all in Mylar, and they're down in my pantry, and they'll be good in that Mylar for many, many years, but I do not have any freeze-dried celery upstairs at this point. So this is going to go in a jar so that we can add it to the shelf because soup season is here, and I love having jars of freeze-dried vegetables upstairs, easily accessible for making my winter soup. So I can just open the jar and shake a little bit into the pot and fill it with wonderful freeze-dried veggies. So she's got that lid nice and tight, and we're also going to put that down in storage for the next time I would like to make some soup. Now we're going to rewind back to our big food prep day. The bones are done roasting in the oven, so now I'm going to move everything over to the crock pot to finish off this broth that we started. So I like to use a crock pot. It's great because it does the work for me overnight. Sometimes I'll do it on the stovetop. If I'm making a huge batch, I'll do it in my big roaster, but this little crock pot is perfect for this amount of bones. It's just 3 soup bones, so I feel like this will do a great job. So we scraped everything out of there, and then there were some bits and lots of flavor stuck to the bottom of that pan, so I went ahead and filled it with some water. We're going to scrape all of that extra flavor out of there because why not? And we'll just add that to the crock pot so that we don't waste any of that. And we'll set that pan aside and use it later. Now we're going to finish this broth. I'm going to add that rosemary that we harvested from the garden. Next, I'm going to add just some of those celery greens that I didn't feed to the chickens. We're going to add a little bit of apple scrap vinegar. That helps leach some of the minerals out of the bones and into the broth. We're going to add some peppercorns, and then of course we'll add some salt. And you can add whatever you like, whatever veggies and herbs and things you like to your broth. You really can't go wrong. We're going to fill it the rest of the way with water and then put that on low on the crock pot for the next 24 hours. And the next afternoon, this is what it looked like. It was filling the house with this amazing smell of homemade broth. I'm just going to strain the solids out, and I use a sink strainer. This is a clean one that I don't use in my kitchen sink. This is only reserved for canning purposes, but it fits perfectly in my canning funnel here. So I can just ladle out my broth and any of the solids will be trapped in the strainer, and then I just have my liquid broth here left behind. Getting this broth done on the weekend is just such a blessing because now I have it available to make meals throughout the rest of the week. And as I said, I really like to make a lot of soup as the weather starts to cool down. And so one day this week, I'm going to show you how I use that broth to just make a what I call a fridge dump soup. It's just using up things that I have in the fridge. I wanted to show you the texture of this broth. Now, it isn't my most gelatinous broth because it was just only those three soup bones, but there is a good jiggle on it. It is gelatinous, and that is what you want to have in your broth. That lets you know that it's full of good gelatin, collagen, all of the healing stuff that's really good for you in a homemade broth. So we're going to add 2 quarts of that, including that fat cap there. That is tallow. That will be really good for us as well. And then we are just adding a bunch of random things that we have in the kitchen. I chopped up some potatoes. This was some leftover grilled pork chops that we had from a dinner one evening. We didn't end up eating them all, and it wasn't enough for another full meal for my family, so we're just going to add that to the pot. I had this little jar of freeze-dried chard, and then we're going to stir that up. And I actually have a few tomatoes here and there, even though they've really slowed down in production. And as I mentioned, our first frost definitely came. I have green tomatoes in boxes down in our cellar. And so every time I go down there, I just look for any of them that are blushing and have a little bit of color on them. And I bring them up to finish ripening. And I need to find a use for them before they go bad. And I didn't have anything else in my meal plan that was calling for tomatoes. So I figured, why not throw some of these tomatoes into my soup here. And this is really how I make soup, adding a little salt. The meat was really heavily seasoned with some steak seasoning. The broth has all that onion and garlic and celery flavor. So I really don't need to add much else to this soup to make it taste delicious. So it simmered on the stove all afternoon or all morning while we were doing school. By the time we were done with school, I was ready to fill our little soup bowls here. I served it with some homemade crackers, and it was just a really comforting lunch for us using that broth that we had prepped. This was a great year for pumpkins here on our homestead. We had volunteer pumpkins growing everywhere on the property, and so I have preserved a lot of pumpkin. I have freeze-dried some, I have canned up some, but I decided to go ahead and roast one up on this meal prep day in order to just have the puree in the fridge ready to go for the week. So I'm going to scoop out the guts, and since the oven is already warm and going with other things, we're going to put these pumpkins on a baking sheet and get them in that oven on 350, and they're going to roast for probably a little over an hour until they're fully cooked through. And then once they were done, several hours later, by the time they had cooked and cooled down a little bit, I scooped out the guts, put them into the blender, and then I could fill a couple of quarts with that pumpkin puree. And then that'll be ready in the fridge for me if I want to make, a pumpkin dessert like a pumpkin pie or some pumpkin pancakes. It'll be ready to go for me for later in the week. And what I ended up making with it were pumpkin muffins. This is my pumpkin muffin recipe. My kids love this. I start with 3 cups of flour. Next, I'm going to add 1 cup of sugar. Then we're going to add 4 teaspoons of baking powder. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, and we're going to add a half a teaspoon of ground cloves. You could add whatever other pumpkin spices you like. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt, and those are all of the dry ingredients. We're going to get those stirred together and then start adding our wet ingredients. So here's that pumpkin puree that we had made. You can see I'm in my robe. It's early in the morning. So excited to have that puree ready to go in the fridge. So we needed 2 cups of pumpkin puree. After that, we are going to add 1 cup of olive oil. I use regular olive oil in all of my baking in place of butter because we're dairy free. You could use melted butter if you're a family that could have dairy. And then we need to add 4 eggs. And it really is that simple. This is my very easy pumpkin muffin recipe. It makes 2 dozen muffins. So I'm going to mix that together. Now, sometimes if I don't feel like getting out my muffin trays and cleaning those up, what is much easier for me to do is to just get out some pie plates and make what I call muffin pies. My kids love that. So I'm going to make 2 separate little muffin pies. I find that 1 dozen worth of muffins fits well into one standard size pie plate. So I'm going to scoop out half of this batter into one of the pie plates because several of my children just like their pumpkin muffins plain and they do not like chocolate. The other half of my children like chocolate. So I'm pouring some chocolate chips into the batter and that'll be a special treat for them. And we're going to fill the other pie plate with the chocolate chip version. Both of these are going to bake on 350 until the center is done, usually about 30 to 35 minutes. While the muffins were baking, I also warmed up some of that bacon that we had pre-cooked, and all of the children we made little smoothies for each of them individually with different ingredients they wanted. They were mostly blueberry, a little bit of cashew yogurt, sun butter. Some of them had bananas in their smoothies. And there are the 2 pumpkin muffin pies. This was such an easy breakfast to make because my pumpkin puree was all ready to go, my bacon was pre-cooked, and the kids really enjoyed this meal. So this is exactly why I do it. This is why I do my meal prep. It makes my mornings go so much more smoothly to have things like that bacon pre-cooked. My eggs are now done cooking in that Dash egg cooker. We're going to go ahead and get those peeled. Like I said before, farm fresh eggs are notorious for being very difficult to peel. The older the egg, the easier they are to peel. And these are eggs that were laid within 24 hours of me peeling them here. So, but because they were steamed in that Dash egg cooker, they are peeling very easily. And I like to, as I said, have about 12 hard-boiled eggs. Sometimes we'll just eat them as snacks. Sometimes I like to go ahead and take half of them and make them into an egg salad for myself for lunches. So that's what I'm going to do with the other half of these hard-boiled eggs. I have those green peppers and radishes that I brought in from the garden. So I'm just going to chop some of that up to add to the crushed hard-boiled eggs. These will make a great lunch for me throughout the week if the children are eating something that contains maybe gluten that I can't have. So we're going to get out that mayonnaise that we made. Like I said, it is a little bit runny, but that's the perfect texture for making the egg salad. I'm also going to add a little bit of pickled banana pepper juice because I like a little spice and vinegar flavor. I also added garlic salt. We're going to stir that up, get that in the fridge, and that should feed me about 3 to 4 lunches. I'll put it on something like a rice cake and eat that for lunch this week. It was really delicious. Okay, our bacon is all done cooking. I have it cooked to about 90%. We're going to set that aside and let it cool down while I move on to another meal. Here I have 4 pounds of ground pork. This is pork that we purchased from our friend who raises it for us. We are going to make some meatballs. I'm going to crack 2 eggs into the bowl. Next, we're going to add some cassava flour. I am making a gluten-free version of meatballs. So in place of something like breadcrumbs, I add the cassava flour. It serves the purpose of kind of absorbing some of the extra liquid in the meatball and helps bind it together a little bit. I also want a little bit of onion flavor. So we had those green onions that we harvested from the garden. I'm just going to go ahead and chop. I grabbed about half of them that we had harvested. We're going to chop those up and add them to our meatball mixture. From there, the only thing that I really need to add is some Italian seasoning and a little bit of salt. And then I'm going to get busy, get my hands in there, and we're just going to work all of this together to make our meatballs. Once I get these all worked together, I'm going to go ahead and wash my hands. I'm just letting you know that I do wash my hands and I just don't show that step because that would be boring to show you every time I wash my hands. I went ahead and grabbed the pan that we had roasted all of the bones for the broth in. And so I'm going to, instead of dirtying a new pan, we're just going to use this. I'm forming my meatballs and we're going to go ahead and bake them in this pan. And so pre-baking these, Then I can put them in the fridge, and then this week when I want meatballs with our spaghetti dinner, all I have to do is add my sauce and they'll be ready to go. This will save me so much prep time on one of my busy days where we're just running around in the afternoon trying to get ready to maybe get the children to ballet. Then the work is done for me and it will take me half the time or a third of the time to get my dinner on the table as it would if I was making these from scratch that day. So those are going in the oven on 350 until they are cooked through. While I have my bowl out, I just rinsed it out, and we're going to go ahead and make some breakfast sausage too. I have 3 more pounds of that same ground pork. To that, I'm going to add some homegrown sage that we have freeze-dried, and we're going to add some maple syrup. And just like with the meatballs, I'm going to get my hands in there. I washed them. Don't worry. After I did this, we are going to form our patties here. We're going to get them on our cookie sheet, and we're going to bake these. And these will be breakfast sausages. You guys know this is a lot of breakfast meat for the week, but I have a lot of children, and I really like my children to have some kind of protein source in the morning. So generally, I'll make some kind of muffin or bread or even pancakes and things, but I like them to either have scrambled eggs or bacon or a sausage or something with the meal so that they fill up on a little bit of protein. Those are also going in the oven with the meatballs. And I feel like at this point, after handling all the raw meat, the counter needs a really thorough scrubbing with some hydrogen peroxide, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. Once all of this meat is cooked, we're going to go ahead and get this in containers and let it cool down for a little bit before we get it in the fridge. And then these will be ready to go for quick breakfast, and the meatballs will be for dinner. So let me, speaking of the meatballs, show you what I did. I just put this lid here on my pan, stuck it in the fridge, and then a couple days later I could pull that out. I had some of our home canned tomato sauce here, and all I have to do is just pour those directly over the top of the cold meatballs that were straight out of the fridge. And then we're going to get this in the oven and just let this cook while I am boiling some spaghetti noodles. So it really only took me maybe 20 minutes to get my noodles ready. Everything was all cooked up. I had baked a cake because on this day it was National Elizabeth Day. And so we surprised my daughter Elizabeth when she got home from ballet, and I had made her a little cake just to make her feel special. And we had a little spaghetti and meatball dinner, and it took me 20 minutes to put this together because I had taken the time to do all of that work the weekend before, and it made a normally stressful evening. Our ballet evenings can be kind of stressful getting the girls to and from where they need to go, but I was able to get a home-cooked meal at the end of the day when they got home on the table because of the prep work. Speaking of prep work, we're going to go ahead and prepare another breakfast. So this is my basic muffin recipe. You can use it with any fruit. So I'm starting with 4 cups of flour and 1 cup of sugar because I am doubling. You would have this if you just wanted to make a dozen muffins, but we are doing 2 dozen. So I'm also going to add 4 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of salt, and then I am adding some cinnamon, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, because I am making apple cinnamon muffins. If I was going to make something like a blueberry muffin, I would leave out the cinnamon and add something else. So I'm also going to add 1 cup of olive oil. We're going to add 2 cups of milk. We use almond milk, but you could use whatever milk you like. And then we are going to add 2 eggs. And as I mentioned, I use this with any kind of fruit. So if I were going to make a blueberry muffin with this, I would have left the cinnamon out and added blueberry extract or vanilla extract. I've done this with strawberries before. I've made this recipe with pears. Pretty much any kind of fruit works in this basic muffin recipe. And because we have apples everywhere that need to be eaten up, and it's just a delicious fall flavored treat, I figured we will do apple cinnamon for this particular breakfast. So all I need to do is chop them up into little cube-sized pieces. I do about 1 apple per dozen muffins. That's just enough to get a little bit of apple into each muffin, but it's not overpoweringly wet and full of apples. Once we get our apples sliced in there, we are going to mix it up. And this day I have a little extra time and don't mind washing out my muffin tins. So we are actually going to make these into actual muffins. Now, to save time, I do use muffin liners. It just makes it a little easier. And that is just a shortcut that I do for myself, as it's a little convenience I allow myself as a busy mom. So we are going to get all of this batter divided between these muffins, and these are going to bake on 400 for about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we will have a breakfast ready to go for the week. While those were baking in the oven, the bacon that we had cooked had cooled down enough that I could get that in the fridge. And you can see that this bacon is cooked to about 90%. So when I want to use this throughout the week, I could pull it out, put it on a cookie sheet, and I only need to maybe warm it up in the oven for 10 minutes and it will finish cooking, because my family likes their bacon a little bit crispy. And so that will be perfect for just maybe 10 minutes in the oven. That's much easier than the hour or so that this thick bacon normally takes to bake in the oven. And then, as always, we do not waste that bacon grease. We're going to save that and put it in the fridge, and it can be used for cooking up some scrambled eggs or possibly frying some potatoes with another breakfast this week. So let me show you what those muffins looked like coming out of the oven. Just some apple cinnamon muffins using that basic fruit muffin recipe. And then when we use those later on in the week, like I mentioned, put the bacon on the cookie sheet. To store your muffins so that they don't go stale, you're going to want to put them in something that's airtight. I love to use this cake container here. That keeps them nice and moist and keeps them from getting kind of hard as they sit for a couple days. And so these were perfectly moist. We had the bacon to go with it, and I got this ready in literally 10 minutes, whereas otherwise, to get between the time it would take to make the muffins and to get them baked in the oven, I would have had to wake up a little bit earlier to get something done. Now, back to our meal prep day. I have created a lot of dishes, and I'm realizing that it's time that I need to wrap things up, because I'm going to have to make dinner soon as well. And I feel like I made good progress here on my list. I didn't get everything done, but I have a good start to the week for making the rest of my meals. So I got dinner done as soon as I got the dishes done. This is what we ate on that day. I had just made a salad. We had some Brussels sprouts and mushrooms, and we had some grilled pork chops. The men are out there. Their game had finished up. The children were all worn out from a day of play, and I was ready to rest after all that time in the kitchen. We will see you next week with another video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Until then, friends, bye.